What's going on, guys? My name is Robert and you are watching Southpaw Autoworks. This is the third video in a series on how to rebuild a power steering pump. In part 1 we covered the teardown, in part 2 we covered the cleaning of the unit, and in part 3 in this video we're going to cover the reassembly. Without further ado, let's dive in. Let's begin with the input shaft. The bearing on this input shaft is damaged. As you can see the insides of this bearing. We shouldn't be able to see the ball bearings or the cage that houses the ball bearings. Unfortunately, this bearing was previously damaged. So I'm going to show you how to remove the bearing and how to reinstall another bearing, but I'm going to be reinstalling the same one. At any rate, I'll show you how to do it. In this example, I'm going to be using an arbor press. If you don't have an arbor press, you can easily do this with a vise and a hammer. Just rig it up in a way that you're not going to damage anything. Here they are separated. The input shaft and bearing assembly are now ready to be installed into the pump housing, but before we do that, we got to get the shaft seal installed into the pump first. This is the shaft seal. If we look closely and flip it over, you can see a spring. This is the garter spring. The garter spring helps the seal to squeeze the shaft and prevent any oil leaks. This shaft seal needs to be installed into the power steering pump housing or body, and I am going to use an arbor press to accomplish this task. However, if you don't have an arbor press, you can easily drive this seal into the pump housing using a suitable size socket and a hammer. If you are going to use the hammer and socket method to drive that seal in, which is totally acceptable, super easy, super fast, great, you do need to know one thing. You do need to know that the shock from the hammer hitting the socket and therefore hitting the seal to drive that seal in, that shock can cause that garter spring on the inside of the seal, it can cause it to pop out. So what happens is you'll install the seal and all the guts to this power steering pump, get the whole thing assembled, get it installed in the vehicle, fill it with oil, bleed it, all that fun stuff, only to find out that it leaks past that seal. And then realize that you have to remove the pump, and then you can't just replace the seal easily. You can't just remove the pulley and get access to the seal. The whole shaft has to come back out. Basically, you have to disassemble the whole pump to get back to that seal to replace the seal if this seal gets screwed up at this part of the rebuild. So you don't want to make this mistake. So with that said, I want to share a little trick that prevents this kind of problem from occurring. This is green assembly goo. There is a link to it in the video description below. Full disclosure, I am an Amazon affiliate and I will make a small commission if you do purchase this, but it is at no cost to you. Take some assembly goo and pack it into the seal like so in several locations around the seal, and this will help prevent that garter spring from popping out or jumping out as it gets shocked by the hammer. Once again, if you're not going to use a hammer and a socket to install this seal into the pump housing, you don't need to mess with this green assembly goo. Whether it's an automatic transmission or a power steering pump like this, I like to use high temp wheel bearing grease on these type of lip seals, as it ensures that there's going to be adequate lubrication to the seal during initial fire up of the unit. This is the front of the power steering pump, and the shaft seal needs to be installed inside of this bore. The shaft seal can be installed in one of two ways. There's only one correct way to install it though. When you install it, the garter spring should be facing inside of the unit. so you should not be able to see it when the seal is installed. As previously mentioned, you can use a hammer and a socket to drive the seal into the pump housing. You can also use an arbor press like this and a socket. However, I happen to own bushing drivers, which I use for automatic transmission repair. So I'm gonna use those. I start with a bushing driver that is slightly bigger than the seal, and I drive the seal all the way down. That bushing driver will stop against the top of the bore. This ensures that the seal has been driven in squarely. Then I get a bushing driver that's just a hair smaller than the seal, and I drive the seal in just a hair more into the bore. You don't want to use a socket or a bushing driver that happens to be the exact same size as the outside diameter of the seal. If you do that, you run the risk of the bushing driver or socket getting stuck in the bore that seal lives in, and you don't want to deal with that. Here's what the seal looks like fully installed. As you can see, the top of the seal is not flush with the top of the bore. However, the top of the seal is flush with the bottom of that chamfered edge or beveled edge, or if you don't know what that term means, just that ramp that's all the way around the top of that bore. You want to get the top of the seal flush with the bottom of that ramp. The drive shaft and bearing are now ready to be installed into the pump. Get your washer, install it into the bore first, followed by your shaft and bearing assembly. Press the shaft all the way down. Guys, if you don't have an arbor press, once again, use a hammer, but do not beat on the end of that shaft with a hammer. Throw a piece of wood on there and beat on the wood. The wood will not damage the end of the shaft like the hammer will. Here's your circular snap ring. I hate to do this, but here's a little reminder, protect your eyes, man. Wear some glasses. These snap rings, they don't mess around. These glasses are made by 3M. I freaking love these things. They're super comfortable on not only the bridge area, but also on the temple, if I could talk, on the temple and around the ears. I mean, I could wear these things all day long. Can wear them with a hat on, doesn't bother them. And they're fairly inexpensive. They're definitely a whole hell of a lot cheaper than going to the eye doctor or the ER. So yeah, protect yourself. If you want to check these out, I've got a link in the video description below. Once you have the snap ring installed into the snap ring groove, I like to take a little flathead screwdriver and a little hammer, and I tap on the inside edge of that snap ring all the way around, and I'm pressing the snap ring outward all the way around to make sure it's fully seated into the snap ring groove. We are now ready to install the pulley. The pulley bore is splined, just like the drive shaft. However, the pulley bore and the drive shaft are not keyed, so that makes for a very straightforward and easy installation. The shaft and nut are reverse thread, so righty-tighty, lefty-loosey will not apply here. Torque the nut to 47 foot-pounds. In part 1 of the series, I showed how to remove this pulley nut with an impact gun, and then I also showed how to do it by hand. I secured the pump in a bench vise and then utilized a long screwdriver to prevent the pulley from rotating while I cranked the pulley nut loose. Simply put the pump into the bench vise and utilize a screwdriver like so to keep the pulley from rotating while you tighten the nut. Let's turn our attention to this side of the pump. Before we start stacking guts back inside of this power steering pump, we need to lubricate some of the inside of it first. I like to use this blue gel. It's real popular with automatic transmission rebuilders. Honestly, you can also use petroleum jelly that you can find anywhere, or you can just use the power steering pump fluid that's recommended for your power steering pump. Lubricating all of this is going to prevent damage to the rubber seals during pump assembly. These alignment dowels align all of the pump guts in the correct orientation with one another, and it helps to align the whole gut stack, the whole pump stack, in the correct orientation with the pump housing that it's going into. As you can see, the dowel pins vary in length, but they also vary in thickness too. Take the long dowel pin and install it inside of this bore. With the pin fully installed into its little bore, you'll be able to see the other end of the pin protruding out of the pump just a little ways. Install this large spring like so. This is the inner side plate. These are the seals for the inner side plate. They happen to be O-rings. Installing these kind of seals are as easy as it gets. This is what it looks like when the seals are installed. Lube up the O-rings. And install the plate with the flat side of the plate facing up. The plate must be aligned with that long dowel pin. We're now ready to install the pump rotor and the pump vanes, and this is a good time to refer back to our notes that we took during disassembly in part 1 of the series. Having detailed notes like this really takes all the guesswork out of this phase of the reassembly of this unit. The pump rotor is installed with the 2 dots facing up. Here are the pump vanes. Examine both sides of the vanes. One side of the vane will look like this. Flip it over and the other side will look like this. Let's review our notes to identify the correct orientation of the vane. I install the vanes one at a time, and I continue to rotate the pump rotor so I can always install each of the new vanes at the 12 o'clock position every time. Here's the remaining dowel pin. Install it here. Install the cam ring with the 2 dots facing up. Lubricate the pump rotor, pump vanes, and cam ring. Here's the pump cover. Here's the O-ring for it. Installing this O-ring is super easy. Lubricate the O-ring and you're now ready to install the pump cover. In part 1 of this video series, we indexed the pump cover with the pump body. This was done to eliminate guesswork at this phase of the reassembly process. The inside of the cover has 2 holes located right here. These 2 holes appear to be identical in diameter, however, they are not. Simply line those holes up in the cover with their respective dowel pins. Round up the 4 pump cover bolts. It's not a bad idea to use medium strength thread locker. Install all of the bolts and run them down by hand until they touch the pump cover. Push the cover down the rest of the way, run the bolts down the rest of the way, and then torque the bolts to 14 foot-pounds. Rotate the pulley to verify that the pump is rotating freely. The flow control valve lives in this section of the pump body. Here are the 2 O-rings, and here's where they are installed. Lubricate the bore with some assembly gel or oil. If you recall, in part 2 of this video series on this pump, we disassembled the flow control valve to clean it even further. This check ball is very tiny and it's really easy for it to get away from you. Take this valve and dip it in the assembly goo. And then stick the check ball onto the valve. Now the check ball isn't going anywhere. You don't need to use this inner pump plate. I only used it just as a means to stand the valve up. I was just making it easier for you guys to see what it is that I'm doing. Install the relief valve spring. The relief valve and check ball. The shims, at the factory, these shims are used to adjust the relief pressure of the flow control valve. Your flow control valve may have more or less shims included. Install the seat. The flow control valve seat is torqued to 108 inch-pounds. Here's the flow control valve, and it's installed into the bore in this orientation. Install the spring. Install the cover and the respective bolts. These bolts are torqued to 96 inch-pounds. The sub valve is located on this section of the power steering pump body. This is the sub valve. Pay special attention to this roll pin. The pin needs to align with this hole down in the bore. Once the sub valve is installed into the bore, you should be able to see a snap ring groove directly above the top of the sub valve. If you can't see the snap ring groove, then the valve isn't in all the way. Simply rotate the valve either direction and you should feel it and hear it drop all the way into the bore. Here's the snap ring. Install the snap ring like so. These two bolts are used to attach the high pressure hose to the power steering pump body. You will not need these bolts until the power steering pump is installed back into the vehicle. When the time comes, torque these bolts to 96 inch-pounds. This is the low pressure inlet port. Here is the inlet port hose bib and O-ring. Install the O-ring like so. Lubricate the O-ring and lubricate the inlet port bore. Install the hose bib. And run down the bolt and torque the bolt to 96 inch-pounds. Here's the finished product in all its beauty and splendor. The pump that we've used throughout this video series happens to be out of a Honda Accord that was living in the junkyard. At the time I was driving a 97 Honda Accord. I needed to rebuild the power steering pump on it. In addition to getting a reseal kit, I also needed a bearing. However, my local supplier did not have the bearing in stock, and I didn't want to wait to get a new bearing shipped to me. So instead I went to the junkyard, pulled this unit out, tore it apart, and snatched the bearing that was in good shape. The principles that I covered throughout this video series can be applied to any power steering pump. I would love to say that if you followed every direction to the T throughout this whole video series, that you will be successful at rebuilding your power steering pump. But guys, I can't give you that guarantee. Too many things can go wrong. Life happens. Guys, I can't even guarantee my own success with anything in life, especially on the first try. I fail all the time, and not even just on the first attempt. Sometimes I'm failing on the second and even the third attempt. It can be really frustrating, and it's, can be time consuming, but I just keep trying until I get it right, however many times that is. If you attempt to rebuild your power steering pump and it doesn't work out on the first attempt, here's some things to keep in mind. Many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. Thomas Edison. Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. Henry Ford. Like I said, I fail all the time, but I keep trying until I get it right. And failure's not a bad thing. I've come to learn that failure, if we're failing, we're growing. And if we're growing and we're failing, we're doing something that's outside of our comfort zone. And you know what? That's exciting. It feels good. Makes me feel alive. So be alright with failure. And know that you're not a failure unless you give up after the first attempt didn't work out. Or even the second one. You just keep trying until you figure it out. Take a different approach. Get some different knowledge. Watch some other videos. You know, there's tons of information out there. Just keep at it. And everything will work out fine. And remember guys, if a Southpaw can do it with one hand, what's possible for you? Catch you next time.